here's the dirty little secret the Real Housewives franchise is built on. Almost none of these women actually had the money. They had access to the money. There's a gigantic difference between those two things, and you only ever find out which one you are on the day the marriage ends. Because divorce is the great revealer. It pulls back the curtain on whose name was really on the deed, whose signature was on the prenup, and who was just renting a lifestyle they thought they owned. And today we are going deep, like genuinely deep, into the housewives who walked into a divorce in head-to-toe designer and walked out millions of dollars poorer. Sometimes millions of dollars in the hole. Some of these stories are jaw-dropping. One of them is heartbreaking. And the very last one flips this entire video on its head because she's the one who beat the system, and what she did differently is the whole lesson. So stay till the end, because that's where it all clicks. Let's get into it. Let's start with the trap that catches more of these women than any other. And the woman living it out in real time, Lisa Hochstein from Real Housewives of Miami. On paper, Lisa had it made. She was married for over a decade to Lenny Hochstein, the so-called boob god of Miami, a plastic surgeon who has thrown around a self-proclaimed net worth of $175 million. They had the waterfront mansion, the whole glittering Miami fantasy. And then in 2022, the marriage imploded, publicly, messily, with allegations of a much younger model in the picture, which Lenny has disputed on the timeline. And here is where Lisa ran face first into the single most important word in any rich divorce. Prenup. Lisa had primarily been a stay-at-home mom for the entire marriage, raising their 2 kids, building her life entirely around his income. But when it came time to split, the agreement she'd signed didn't reflect that $175 million lifestyle. So what's played out is almost painful to watch. She's been fighting over temporary support, fighting to stay in or near the mansion, accepting a deal that had Lenny building her a home and covering a high monthly rent. And then turning around and accusing him of dragging his feet and not complying. She has openly said her housewife's salary, reportedly around $30,000 an episode, doesn't come close to covering the life she used to live. Think about that. She didn't lose millions in cash. She lost access to a fortune she was never legally entitled to keep, and that is the cruelest version of losing. Because from the outside, it looked like it was hers the whole time. That's the trap. Now watch how it gets so much worse for the women who didn't even have a prenup to protect them. Which brings us straight to Atlanta. And Kim, if you want to watch a fortune evaporate in slow motion, this is the case study. Kim married Croy Bierman, a former Atlanta Falcons linebacker, NFL money. The big house, the spin-off show, the whole blended family empire. For years, they sold us the dream. And right now, in 2026, that dream is a smoking crater. The couple separated in 2023, and the divorce has been so brutal and so drawn out that it has, at this point, lasted longer than some of their happiest years together. But the money is the real horror story. We're talking over $1 million owed to the heirs in back taxes. Foreclosure threats on the mansion. Croy has claimed for years that Kim burned through the money he earned in the league. And here's the part that turns financial ruin into something genuinely sad. It's not just the money anymore. Last year, Kim temporarily lost primary physical custody of their 4 minor kids. She's been reduced to fighting for every other weekend while the courts sorted out who's the more stable parent. So Kim is the cautionary tale of what happens when there's no prenup, no separate fortune, and the lifestyle was being financed faster than it was being earned. When the marriage collapsed, there was no safety net underneath either of them, just debt and lawyers. The glamour was real. The foundation under it was quicksand. Now let's go back in time to New York, to a woman who married into possibly the most legendary fortune in American history and still ended up roughly $20 million in debt. Sonia Morgan. And this one is fascinating because Sonia didn't marry some flashy new money guy. She married John Adams Morgan, a literal great-grandson of J.P. Morgan, old money. The kind of name carved into the side of a museum. When they divorced back in 2006, the report suggests Sonja walked away with something like $30 to $40 million in assets. So how on earth does a woman who got tens of millions end up filing for bankruptcy? And this is the lesson hiding inside Sonja's story, the same one we keep circling. Assets are not cash. What Sonja got was tied up in things. The iconic 5-story Upper East Side townhouse, a place in Telluride, a home in the south of France. Gorgeous, prestigious, and brutally expensive to maintain. The upkeep alone was bleeding her dry. Then a movie project she was producing collapsed, and she got hit with a roughly $7 million judgment, which ballooned to around $9 million with fees. By 2010, she filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, listing nearly $20 million in debt. She fought to hold on to that townhouse for over a decade, listing it, pulling it, relisting it, renting it out. And when it finally sold, it went at an online auction for close to half of what she'd once hoped. She has said her ex was supposed to pay her millions in the settlement and that it didn't come through the way it was meant to. So here's a woman who married a billionaire's bloodline and still nearly lost everything because owning trophies is not the same as having liquidity. John Adams Morgan, by the way, stayed completely silent through all of it, remarried, and passed away in early 2025 at 94, while Sonja spent years on television processing the loss of a life that had quietly moved on without her. Okay, I need to slow down for this next one because it's the darkest story on this list and it deserves to be handled with care. Taylor Armstrong, one of the original Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. Taylor and her husband Russell projected the ultimate Beverly Hills image, the mansion, the parties, the access. But behind the scenes, according to lawsuits that came out later, that lifestyle was allegedly being propped up with other people's money. Russell was a financier with a long, troubling history of legal and financial problems, and as their marriage was falling apart in 2011, with the couple separated and headed toward divorce, the walls were closing in. He was reportedly more than $1.5 million in debt. His own lawyer later said Russell had essentially been living month to month to fund the lifestyle. And then, tragically, before any of it could be resolved, Russell died by suicide in the summer of 2011. I'm not going to sensationalize that. It was a genuine tragedy, and Taylor has spoken with real honesty over the years about the abuse she says she endured in that marriage. But here's what makes it relevant to this list. And it's gutting. When Russell died, the debt didn't die with him. Taylor was left holding it. She got hit with a $1.5 million lawsuit tied to his business dealing, and to settle it, she reportedly had to hand over deeply personal things, including her canary yellow diamond engagement ring valued at around $250,000, and a couple of Birkin bags that, in a final cruel twist, turned out to be fakes. Imagine grieving a spouse and a marriage at the same time you're being forced to liquidate your wedding ring to pay off his debts. That is not losing millions in a glamorous, eye-rolling, rich people problems way. That is losing everything, and then being handed the bill. Taylor's story is the reminder that underneath the sparkle, some of these fortunes were never real at all. They were illusions held up with borrowed money, and when they collapsed, real people were buried underneath. And that brings us to the queen of this entire conversation, the woman whose name is basically synonymous with a lifestyle built on money that wasn't what it seemed. Erika Jayne. You know the broad strokes by now. Erika was married for over 20 years to Tom Girardi, one of the most celebrated plaintiff's attorneys in America, the guy tied to the Erin Brockovich legend, the lawyer for the little guy. And Erika became a phenomenon on Beverly Hills selling pure, weaponized wealth, the glam squad, the private jets, the line that became her brand, that it's just expensive to be her. Then, in November 2020, she filed for divorce, and within a month, the whole thing detonated. Lawsuits alleged that Tom had embezzled millions from his own clients, including settlement money owed to the grieving families of a plane crash, and that he'd funneled tens of millions through a company set up for Erika's career. Tom would eventually be convicted of wire fraud and sentenced to over 7 years in prison. And Erika? Here's where I have to be precise, because the internet loves to get this wrong. Erica was never criminally charged. She was dismissed from the major lawsuit against her in 2022, and she has always insisted she had no idea what Tom was doing. But she still got financially gutted by the fallout. A federal judge ordered her to surrender a pair of diamond earrings worth $750,000 after ruling the money used to buy them was stolen from clients, calling it stolen property she happened to be holding. The bankruptcy trustee chased her for more than $25 million they said her company received. And while she fought that for years and ultimately settled it confidentially in 2026, the bigger loss is almost impossible to put a number on. She lost the entire foundation of her identity. The wealth that made her famous turned out to be, at best, built on someone else's crimes. You can keep the residency, keep the show, keep the persona, but you cannot unknow that the diamonds in your ears were traced back to a dead person's settlement. That's a kind of bankruptcy money can't fix. So by now, you might be thinking the lesson is simple. Marry rich, divorce poor, the women always lose. And that is exactly the assumption I want to blow up, because there is one housewife who walked into a divorce and walked out with $30 million, free and clear. And the reasons why are the entire point of this video. Camille Grammer. Camille was married to Kelsey Grammer, Fraser himself, for 13 years. And when that marriage ended in 2011, after his affair became public, Camille did not get trapped, she did not get buried in debt, she got paid. Roughly $30 million, about half of their estimated $60 million in combined assets. So what did Camille do that Lisa and Kim and the others couldn't? 3 things. And write these down because this is the through line of everything you just watched. Number 1, there was no prenup limiting her, unlike Lisa Hochstein, who signed away her leverage before she ever needed it. Number 2, California is a community property state, which means a long marriage entitles each spouse to half of what was built during it. Full stop. No arguing about whose name is on what. And number 3, and this is the one nobody talks about. The money was actually there, and it was actually clean. Kelsey was reportedly nearly broke when they married, and the reporting at the time credited Camille with helping manage and rebuild the fortune during the marriage, so there were real, liquid, legitimate assets to split. Not borrowed money, not stolen money, not illiquid trophy houses bleeding cash. Camille even defended herself for taking it, pointing out she'd been married 13 years and had earned her share. And she's right. The difference between the woman who loses millions and the woman who walks away with 30 isn't luck, and it isn't even the size of the husband's net worth. It's the prenup. It's the law where you live. And it's whether the money was ever real and clean in the first place. So look at the pattern, because it's staring right at us. Lisa Hochstein had a rich husband, but a prenup that boxed her in. Kim had NFL money but no separate fortune and a mountain of shared debt. Sonia Morgan married a literal Morgan and still drowned because her millions were trapped in houses she couldn't afford to keep. Taylor Armstrong inherited her late husband's debt because the lifestyle was an illusion financed by other people. Erika Jayne lost the foundation of her entire identity because the wealth was allegedly never legitimately hers to begin with. And even the ones who technically won sometimes feel like it. Shannon Beador walked away from Orange County with a $1.4 million settlement and $10,000 a month and was so convinced she'd been shortchanged that she later sued her own divorce lawyer for talking her into it. Only Camille, with no prenup, community property law on her side, and clean money on the table, walked away genuinely ahead. The fantasy these shows sell us is that proximity to wealth is the same as having it, and divorce is the moment that lie gets exposed. Every single time. Which is why I want to leave you with the real takeaway, and it's not about housewives at all. The flex was never the mansion, or the Birkin, or the glam squad. The flex is your name on the asset, the agreement you understood before you signed it, and money that's actually yours and actually clean. Everything else is just a really expensive costume you're allowed to wear until someone decides to take it back. These women learned that the hardest way imaginable, in court, on camera, with millions of us watching. The least we can do is actually learn the lesson with them. So now I want to hear from you. Out of all of these, whose financial downfall shocked you the most? Are you team she should have protected herself with a prenup, or team she sacrificed her whole life and deserved half no matter what? Because that debate is the entire heart of this, and I genuinely go back and forth. Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And if this breakdown taught you something or just fed your reality TV brain in the best way, smash that like button, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive, and I'll see you in the next one. Love you guys. Bye. One last note before you go. Because it matters. Taylor Armstrong's story touches on suicide, and that's a heavy thing to sit with. If anything in this brought something up for you, please know it's worth reaching out to someone you trust, and there are people and resources out there who genuinely want to help. Take care of yourselves out there.